For the title of this video, I'm sure y'all know what is going down today. Yes, you read correctly, model sheets. Oh boy. In my opinion, this is the hardest part in designing a character, but when it's done correctly, it looks freaking amazing. In order to accomplish a solid model sheet, you have to be super anal about every single little detail, which is a pain. Do not fear though, I have some tips and tricks that will make your model sheet creating easier. So first things first, recap. If you didn't already know, this is part 4 in my character design process series. And if you haven't watched part 1, 2, or 3, shame on you. But I will forgive you because sometimes clip notes are better than the full entire book. In part 1, I started with thumbnail silhouettes, trying to figure out who I want this character to be. Then in part 2, I made iterations, exploring different design directions I can take this character. And lastly, in part 3, I put on my Vico pants and made some hard decisions on a final design as well as showing y'all my rendering process. Okay, so now you should be all caught up to part 4. Here we are, model sheets. Let's go. So the very first tip I'm giving y'all is to make guidelines. This is super helpful to making sure that your design is consistent for all the different positions of the design. I like to put lines for the top of the head, the chin, the waist, the crotch, the knees, and the heels. All of these points, well, except for the head, are points that are the joints. Joint points. I found that it's easier for me to draw consistently when I am basing the design relative to where the joints are, which is why I put my guidelines at the joints. But it's kind of up to you on where you want to put your guidelines. Like maybe you prefer a line on the shoulders instead of the chin. My first tip is to take the sketch of your already existing character and lower the opacity and then just draw on top of that the position that you're working on. It's super convenient, so you don't have to worry about placement, and instead all you have to think about is what does the design look like at this angle. I recommend always starting a character sheet with the front pose because 1, it's the easiest, and 2, you can just copy pasta flip for the backside, so make your life easier and do the easy stuff first. There are typically 2 different positions that a 3D artist uses to model and rig from: the A pose and the T pose. Most concept artists do the A pose just because you can fit a lot more of the design in one page, and it doesn't look as weird and unnatural in my opinion, which is why in this case I am doing the A pose. Fun fact though, the A pose in medical terminology is actually called anatomical position. So now if you are ever on a game show like Jeopardy or something and someone asks a question relating to game dev and the medical field, you probably know it has something to do with the A pose or the anatomical position. You're welcome. So I struggled a lot with this character sheet, and that's just because the program that I'm using to draw with, Adobe Fresco, doesn't have a symmetry draw tool like Photoshop does. So I would literally have to draw the entirety of one side and then flip it for the other side and then hope for the best that it looks good. So if anyone from Adobe is watching this, please add the symmetry draw feature. It would just make my life so much easier. Funny thing, while I was working on this model sheet, there was an update for Adobe Fresco and I was like, this is it. This is the time they're actually adding the symmetry draw feature. But no, it was not. It was just some new lame features and some new brushes. And this is why you do not get excited for updates. You will be disappointed. After I finish the front design, I copy pasta so that I can draw the back, and I erase parts that aren't needed like her face, and then I add parts that are needed like her butt and hair. Now the design that you see is currently not the full design, it's the design underneath her cloak and armor. And the reason why I do this is because it's important to show the design elements underneath, because the cloth and hair move in animation, and if the 3D artist has no idea what's underneath, they're just gonna make it up or be really upset at you for not giving them the information. They have a hard enough job modeling as it is, so be nice and show the underside of the design. Okay, once I finish the back of her design, I move on to the side. Now I have to draw both the left and the right side of her design, and that's just because she has different pouches and pockets that I have to account for, so I have to draw both, you know? If your design is the same on both sides, you probably don't need to worry about it and just only draw one side, but in my case, I have to. So here's a quick tip to drawing the side of a character design. So the human form from its side actually goes in like a zigzag pattern. So starting from the neck, it goes back, and then to the chest, it goes forward. The waist moves back into the hips, and the thighs go forward, and the calves go back, and then it ends with going into the feet, which are forward. This zigzag pattern will help your character not look so slanted. I have seen so many character sheets where like the character side is like this or like this, either leaning too far forward or too far back, and you know it looks off because the balance is not there. So to make sure that your design is balanced, you want to make sure the back, the booty, the calves, and the heels are all aligned. And that zigzag pattern will help you make the design not look flat. Now there might be some of you that are wondering, how many positions do I need for a model sheet? And my suggestion is you should just draw as many as you think the 3D artist is gonna need. Maybe they only need like a 3/4 front and a 3/4 back, like the League of Legends skin team typically does. Or maybe you actually need 8 positions, just to make sure your design can be seen at all the right angles, and be very nice to your 3D artist. If there's one thing you take away from this video, it's that you are making this model sheet for a 3D artist. Okay? It's even in the name, model sheet. This isn't for you, this is for the 3D artist. So make it good. Now we're getting to the hard anal part of this model sheet. And that's the armor and all the other details that goes into this character design. This is the struggle bust part. But it looks nice when it's done. Eyes on the prize. The only tip I have for y'all when it comes to making sure that everything works in the design in all the different positions is to just think really, really, really hard of how the detail is gonna look and work in a turnaround fashion. Like, if you were the character, turn yourself around and envision what that would look like and actually make it happen. A lot of finessing. Like for the armor, it was so hard because it's like curved on the end, but then it goes like flat at that tip up there. So trying to relay that initially was a very big struggle bus, but I ended up figuring out. I also drew both sides of the sword just because I figured the 3D artist would probably need that. And I also needed it for my armor because of the back part of her design. Like, it also has to work with the front. And I know I did this in part 3. It was just not as detailed and refined like I have to do in this model sheet. So I'm being even more anal at this point for the armor slash sword, which required me to puzzle piece and take it apart just like in part 3, which took a while and it was very painful, but it looks cool now. So just remind yourself, when it's painful, it's gonna look cool, okay? It's worth it. It's worth it, I promise. I'm so glad to be done with this part of the design because the detailing is my least favorite part, but now that it's done, it looks gorgeous, it looks perfect, it looks nice and clean, and it actually makes sense, which is cool. Now here we are at the fun part, which is the fastest part, my favorite part, the color, making everything sparkle. making the model sheet look fancy. So I first start off with coloring everything in nice and simple, flat colors. And once that is done, I like to add color to my line art because I think it just looks nice. And I have a super fast, easy way of doing that. So first I duplicate the base layer and clip it to my line art layer. I then like to lower the opacity of the color layer on top of the line art layer. But if you want bright, colorful line art, then just leave it as be. Next, you want to set your line art layer to multiply, and bam, you now have colored line art that looks cool. You're welcome. I take payments in a like and a subscribe. Thanks. On top of everything, I like to add a shadow gradient going from the top, or going from the bottom to the top. And it's very subtle, but it adds a nice extra sense of volume, and it brings more focus to the top part of the design, the face, which is more appealing than the feet, which is why I do it. And finally, I add some small basic shadows just to add a little bit more volume and emphasis on the character having form, and to show what stuff is in front versus what is behind. And that's pretty much it. Like, super simple, nice and clean, looks great. And you want to make sure that you also add in a 3/4 front and 3/4 back that is fully rendered, so that the 3D artist can see the full entire form as well as textures and colors of what it should look like on the 3D model. Okay? That's good. Yeah. Do that. Yep, so here's the full model sheet, 4 positions, 8 different versions of the positions, as well as the 3/4 front and back. That is it for this video. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for part 5, because we're gonna be laying out all the art from this video series into nice, clean portfolio pieces. And that's all I got for you, so bye.